The crack wasn't his phone. It was the back of his head. Elias felt the impact a half-second after he heard it, a wet, hollow sound that echoed off the towering marble pillars of the Crestview Galleria. The scent of Chanel No. 5 from the boutique to his left and hot, salty pretzels from the kiosk to his right crashed together. A man's voice, thick with rage and exertion, spat hot breath by his ear. "Stay down, you little punk! Stay down!" A knee ground into his spine, expertly, agonizingly, pinning him to the polished stone floor. The pain was a white-hot flash, but the cold was what registered. The marble was freezing, a shock of absolute cold against his cheek and the thin fabric of his hoodie. Elias Vance didn't flail. He didn't curse. He didn't plead. He went preternaturally still, his training kicking in, overriding the 18-year-old's panic with the analyst's calculating calm. Asset compromised. Location, Crestview Galleria, Central Atrium. Assailant, 1, male, Caucasian, 40s, 220, brown hair, armed. He mentally cataloged the man on his back. The uniform was local PD, but the mall's insignia was on a small shoulder patch. Off-duty, working security, the most dangerous kind of cop. Bored, empowered, and looking for a reason. I said, "Put your hands behind your back." The officer, whose name tag read Miller, roared. The sound was for the crowd that was already forming. Elias's right arm was trapped beneath him. His left was being wrenched backward at an angle that made his shoulders scream. He didn't fight the pull. He flowed with it, just enough to relieve the pressure, but not enough to be mistaken for assistance. "I am not resisting, sir," Elias said, his voice muffled by the floor. He tasted salt and the faint chemical tang of floor wax. "Shut your mouth!" Miller yanked the arm harder. The snick, snick, snick of a zip-tie cuff being pulled tight was a sound of finality. "Got a call about a punk in a gray hoodie snatching purses. And what do I find? A punk in a gray hoodie, miles from where he belongs." It was a lie, a bad one. Elias knew for a fact there was no call. This was freelance profiling. He was wearing a simple gray hoodie, dark jeans, and worn sneakers. In the Crestview Galleria, this was the uniform of the help. Or, in Officer Miller's eyes, the uniform of the suspect. He was an anomaly against the bright displays of Cartier and Gucci. He was a 5'10" black teen in a place where he didn't belong. His phone. The thought cut through the pain. His primary device. It had skittered from his hand when Miller blindsided him. A full-body tackle from behind without a single word of warning. He saw it, 10 feet away, by the leg of a faux marble bench. The screen was a spider web of fractured glass. Data integrity, unknown, mission, compromised. The fury that rose in him was cold and sharp. It wasn't for the humiliation, or the pain in his head, or the knee in his back. It was for the work. 2 years of work. 2 years of tracking a ghost, a money launderer named Volkov, who used this very mall as his bank. And Elias, the prodigy, the cyber forensics specialist the Bureau brought in when they needed the impossible, had just planted the exploit. He had been walking to the exfiltration point, the data packet transferring to the burner in his pocket, when Miller had ended it all. "Look at this," Miller grunted, using his free hand to pat Elias down, rough and invasive. He pulled Elias's wallet from his back pocket. "What's a kid like you doing with—" He opened it. "Elias Vance." "Well, Elias, you're in a whole heap of trouble." The crowd was a ring of ghosts. Their faces, visible from his low angle, were a mix of horror, pity, and a sickening, eager curiosity. Phones were out. Dozens of them, little black rectangles capturing his degradation. The mall's soft classical music, Vivaldi's Spring, was a grotesque counterpoint to Miller's grunting and the click of the cameras. "Sir," Elias said again, his voice dangerously level. He had to stall. He had to give his team time to react, to salvage this. I advise you to stand up, remove these restraints, and walk away. Miller laughed. It was a short, ugly bark. You advise me? You're in no position to advise anyone, kid. You're coming with me. He yanked Elias's cuffed arms, dragging him into a sitting position. The atrium lights were blinding. Let's see what else you got. He jammed his hand into Elias's hoodie pocket and pulled out the burner phone, the decoy, the one he was meant to find. Aha! What's this? One of those drug phones, huh? No service, all encrypted? I know what this is. Elias watched, his heart a cold stone. He had needed Miller to believe he'd won. He had needed him to find the decoy. But his real phone, the one with the actual data, was strapped to his ankle. Still, he prayed, intact. The problem was the shattered phone on the floor. That was the relay. The data stream from Volkov's network was routing through that phone to the ankle device. Miller hadn't just tackled a teen, he'd smashed the digital bridge. Officer Miller, Elias said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. He no longer sounded like a scared kid. He sounded like an auditor. You have made a grave error. You are interfering with a multi-agency federal investigation. Miller paused, his hand halfway to his radio. He looked at Elias, really looked at him, and saw the utter lack of fear. He saw the cold, intelligent fury. It was a look he didn't understand, and it made him angrier. A federal investigation? He scoffed, his voice booming for the audience. You're what, 17? You're a federal delinquent. Shut up before I add resisting and impersonating an officer to the list. He grabbed the zip tie and hauled Elias to his feet. The world swam. The back of his head throbbed. He stumbled, and Miller shoved him hard. Walk, in front of me. Elias stood, swaying slightly. He locked eyes with Miller. The officer was enjoying this. The power, the public validation of his worst instincts. This is your last chance, officer, Elias said, his voice quiet but carrying in the sudden hush. Let me go. Or what? Miller sneered, poking him in the chest. You gonna call your little gang? You gonna call your mama? No, a new voice said. It was female, calm, and cut through the air like a scalpel. He's going to call me. Officer Miller turned. The crowd parted slightly. A woman stood there, an island of severe calm in the sea of agitated shoppers. She was in her late 30s, wearing a charcoal gray pantsuit that looked more expensive than anything in Miller's own closet. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight, professional bun. She held a cup of See's Candies coffee in one hand. She hadn't rushed. She had simply arrived. Ma'am, this is an active police scene, Miller said, puffing his chest out. Step back for your own safety. The woman took a sip of her coffee. You're off duty, Miller. Your active police scene is an off-book security gig, and you just assaulted our asset. Miller's face began to tighten. The redness of exertion was being replaced by the blotchy red of confusion. You're what? Who the hell are you? I'm the person you're going to have to explain this to, she said. She put her coffee cup down neatly on the rim of a nearby fountain. I'm Special Agent Kaylin Rivas, FBI. She didn't flash a badge. She just stated it as a fact. A ripple of nervous laughter went through the crowd. Miller joined in. Oh, you're FBI? Right. And he's a federal investigator? He gestured at Elias with contempt. You two think this is a joke? You're both obstructing. He reached for his real cuffs, the steel ones on his belt. You know what? You can come with me, too. He took a step toward Rivas. It was a fatal miscalculation. Kaylin, Elias said, his voice tight. He was looking past Miller, past Rivas. Target spooked. Balcony, 2 o'clock, red blazer. Rivas didn't even look. She spoke into her wrist, her voice never rising. Team Griffin, target is mobile. North balcony heading east. Red blazer, intercept. Do not engage. Just track. Miller stopped. He heard her. He looked up at the balcony. He saw a man in a red blazer quicken his pace and disappear into a service corridor. He looked back at Rivas. The confidence in his face finally, disastrously, began to crack. What is this?" he stammered. "This," Rivas said, "is you, Officer Miller, being in the worst possible place at the worst possible time. But more accurately, it's you creating it." And then the world shifted. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in silent, dreadful beats. The man in the expensive suit who had been pretending to read the Wall Street Journal on the bench folded his paper. He stood. The woman pushing the high-end baby stroller stopped. She checked her brake, turned, and stood at attention. Two janitors, who had been lazily sweeping debris 30 feet away, stopped sweeping. They put their brooms against the wall and turned. One of them, a thick-necked man with a prominent scar, tapped the earpiece in his ear. A young woman at the pretzel kiosk, who had been handing out samples, set her tray down. A man at the sunglass kiosk. A couple window shopping at the Cartier. A man who had been getting his shoes shined. One by one, they disengaged from their civilian lives. They didn't run. They didn't shout. They simply converged. They walked with a calm, measured pace, their footsteps clicking in near unison on the marble. They formed a loose, perfect circle. A perimeter. It was a classic containment formation. There were 10 of them. 10 ordinary shoppers, janitors, and vendors who had, in the space of 15 seconds, become a silent, watchful ring of professionals. They all had one thing in common. They were all looking, with a complete lack of emotion, at Officer Miller. The crowd of actual civilians, the phone-wielding shoppers, fell utterly silent. The Vivaldi was still playing, a frantic, cheerful violin over a scene of absolute, cold menace. Miller was breathing fast. His head swiveled, left, right. He was trapped. He was an animal in a snare. His hand, which had been reaching for his cuffs, now hovered, shaking, near his service weapon. "Don't," Rivas advised, her voice soft. The man from the bench, the one in the suit, stepped forward. He was older, with gray at his temples. He flipped open his credentials. The gold shield was unmistakable. "Special Agent Harris, FBI. Officer, I suggest you take your hand away from your weapon." One by one, around the circle, 10 badges flashed in the bright, artificial light of the atrium. 10 shields, all reflecting the face of one terrified, overzealous police officer. Miller froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His arm was locked in place, his knee still bent from his step toward Rivas. He looked like a mannequin, paused mid-stride. He was still holding the zip tie connected to Elias. Elias just watched him. He had seen this before. The moment the world reconfigures itself in front of someone's eyes. The moment a bully, so secure in his power, realizes he is, in fact, the smallest, most insignificant person in the room. "Officer Miller," Rivas said, stepping into the circle, "you are being detained for assaulting a federal asset and interfering with Operation North Star. Please release my agent." Miller didn't or couldn't move. His fingers were locked on the zip tie. Elias sighed. He was done waiting. With a pained grunt, he snapped his own wrists apart. The heavy-duty zip tie, pulled to its breaking point by the leverage, parted with a sharp crack. He rubbed his raw, red wrists and took a step away from Miller. He was free. The circle of agents didn't move. Miller stared at the broken zip tie in his hand, then at Elias, then at the 10 impassive faces. The entire, vast, three-story atrium was as quiet as a church. You broke," Miller whispered. "You were detaining me unlawfully," Elias said, his voice flat. He turned to Rivas. "Kay, the relay. Agent Harris, secure the relay device," Rivas ordered. Harris stepped forward, produced an evidence bag, and meticulously, with gloved hands, collected the shattered pieces of the phone Miller had knocked from Elias's hand. He sealed the bag. Miller finally found his voice. It was a reedy, pathetic thing. He matched a description, a purse snatching." "There was no purse snatching, officer," Rivas said, her voice dripping with contempt. "There was just you, seeing a kid in a hoodie and deciding he didn't belong. You didn't ask a question. You didn't identify yourself. You tackled him from behind. We have it on 4 different feeds, Miller. We have it in 4K with high-fidelity audio. You just ended your career on camera." She looked at Elias. "The decoy?" Elias nodded, gesturing to the burner phone Miller still clutched in his other hand. "He has it." "Give it to me," Rivas said. Like a child, his hand trembling, Miller held out the decoy phone. Rivas took it from him. "And this," she said to the agents, "is why we have decoys." She turned back to Miller. The last vestiges of her patience were gone, replaced by a cold, bureaucratic fury. "Officer Frank Miller, badge number 4477. You are off duty, you are armed, and you just assaulted an 18-year-old federal consultant in the middle of his operation. You blew our surveillance on Volkov. You compromised a 2-year investigation, and you did it," she paused, letting the words hang, "because you didn't like his hoodie." She stepped so close their faces were only inches apart. "Your weapon," she said, "and your badge. Give them to me. Now." The request was an impossibility. It was a violation of every code Miller lived by. You can't," he stammered, his hand instinctively covering the butt of his Glock. "You're FBI. I'm local PD. You don't have the authority." "Authority?" Rivas's laugh was a sharp, humorless sound. "I have 10 federal agents at my back, officer. You are a civilian contaminant at a federal crime scene. The crime," she added, "being your assault on him. You are also a material witness, and your firearm, which you are carrying off duty at a private security gig, is now part of that investigation. So, yes, I have the authority. Give it to me." Miller looked around the circle. 10 pairs of eyes, unblinking. The man from the shoe-shine stand, the woman from the stroller, the janitor with the scar. They weren't just agents. They were the tactical team. He could see the bulges under their jackets now. He saw the focus in their stances. He was outmanned, outgunned, and, most terrifyingly, outranked. The crowd of civilians was filming every second. They were capturing the moment a cop's power, so absolute and terrifying just 2 minutes ago, evaporated into mist. His shoulders slumped. The rage, the arrogance, the certainty, it all drained out of him, leaving a hollow, trembling shell. Slowly, with 2 fingers, he unclipped his Glock from its holster. He held it out, butt first, his hand shaking so violently he almost dropped it. Agent Harris stepped forward and took the weapon, clearing the chamber with a practiced, efficient series of movements before securing it. "Your badge, Miller," Rivas commanded. This was worse. This was the true humiliation. The gun was a tool. The badge was his identity. He unclipped it from his belt. The sunlight from the atrium's high glass ceiling glinted off the cheap metal. He held it out. Rivas didn't take it. She just nodded at Harris, who produced another evidence bag and, using his gloved hand, plucked it from Miller's grasp as if it were a contaminated object. I had probable cause," Miller whispered, a last desperate plea to the universe. "Suspicious individual? Matching description?" Elias, who had been silently rubbing his wrists, finally spoke. His voice was tired. What description, Miller? Black? Young? Hoodie? What else was there? Did your non-existent bolo mention he was 5'10", 165 pounds? Did it mention his sneakers? Or was that just your own personal checklist? Miller flinched. The words hit harder than the tackle. You didn't see a suspect, Elias continued, his voice low and intense. You saw me. You saw me in your mall, this expensive white cathedral, and you decided I didn't have the right to exist here. You didn't see a person. You saw a problem to be removed. Elias took a step toward him. Miller flinched back. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had inverted, violently. Elias was now the predator, Miller the prey. The phone you broke, Elias said, gesturing to the evidence bag Harris held, was a $40 burner. The data on it was junk, but it was my junk. You assaulted me, and you destroyed my property, all because you're a racist who gets a thrill from putting his knee on a kid's neck. Elias, Rivas said, a gentle warning. Asset, stand down. Elias ignored her. He was no longer Agent Vance, the cold analyst. He was Elias, the 18-year-old kid with a bleeding scrape on his cheek and a throbbing headache. Do you know what you've done? The man in the red blazer you just let escape? That's Gregor Volkov. He's laundered over $300 million for the Eastern European mob. He's responsible for at least 6 murders. We've been trying to get inside his network for 2 years. And Elias poked his own chest. I was inside, right up until you decided to play hero and tackle the first black kid you saw. The blood drained completely from Miller's face. He looked gray. He looked sick. The mob? He whispered. You're a fool, Elias said, his voice raw with a fury that was almost grief. You're a pathetic, violent fool, and you've ruined everything. Vance, enough! Rivas's voice was sharp. This was an order. Elias stopped. He clenched his fists, then, with visible effort, unclenched them. He took a deep, shuddering breath and stepped back, the mask of the professional sliding back into place. But his eyes never left Miller. Rivas turned to the 2 janitor agents. Agents, escort Mr. Miller to the secondary command post. Read him his rights. Detention, not arrest. Get his statement. And, she added, call his precinct. Have them send a patrol car to pick him up. His captain is going to want to hear this from us, not from YouTube. The 2 agents moved in. Sir, one said, his voice polite but firm, please come with us. They didn't touch him. They didn't have to. They simply flanked him. Miller, weaponless, badgeless, and broken, gave one last wild-eyed look at the crowd, at the flashing phones, and then, his head hung low, he let them walk him away. The crowd watched him go, a walk of shame past the fountain and the glittering storefronts. As he disappeared, the tension broke. A few people, shockingly, began to applaud. Not for Miller. For the silent, efficient justice they had just witnessed. The circle of agents dissolved, melting back into the civilian flow as if they had never been. Only Rivas, Harris, and Elias remained. Well, Harris said, adjusting his suit jacket, that was loud. Get that relay to the van, Rivas said, her voice tight with stress. Tell Tech 1 to rebuild it. I want to know what we lost. Go. Harris nodded and was gone. Rivas turned to Elias. The severity on her face softened, just a fraction, into something like maternal concern. She gently touched the scrape on his cheek. You okay, kid? Elias flinched from the touch. I'm fine, Kay, but the relay was shattered. The stream is cut. Volkov is running. The operation is dead. He won. He didn't win, Rivas said, her jaw tight. He's just delayed. No, Elias said, looking at the smear on the marble where his head had hit. He won. Miller gave him the win. All that work for nothing. Not for nothing, Riva said. She looked around at the civilians, who were now talking in excited, hushed tones, uploading their videos, sharing their story. We may have lost Volkov for now, but the entire world just got to see what really happened. His department, our OPR, they can't bury this, they can't spin it. This, she said, gesturing to the ring of phones, is cold, hard evidence. That part of it isn't for nothing? Elias just shook his head. That's not justice, Kay. That's just consequences. He looked down at his raw wrists, at the broken zip tie on the floor. It doesn't feel like enough. The ride back to the field office was silent. They sat in the back of a black, unmarked Chevrolet Suburban, the kind that blends into DC traffic by being aggressively anonymous. Elias leaned his head against the cool, tinted glass, the city's luxurious facade sliding by in a blur. The adrenaline had long since faded, leaving behind the dull, throbbing ache in his head and the deeper, colder ache of failure. Rivas was on her phone, her thumb flying across the screen as she typed reports and fielded messages. The air in the truck was thick with the unspoken. Tech 1 just confirmed, Rivas said, not looking up from her screen. The relay's flash memory was pulverized. The drive is a total loss. Elias closed his eyes. So it's over. Volkov is gone. 2 years, down the drain. His car was last seen crossing the Key Bridge into Virginia. Customs and Border Protection have been alerted. He won't make it to Dulles, Rivas said, but her voice lacked conviction. They both knew Volkov had contingencies. He had private airstrips. He had other identities. He was a ghost, and Miller had just handed him a 2-hour head start. And Miller? Elias asked, his voice flat. Internal affairs at his precinct are mortified. That was their word. They've suspended him, pending investigation. The OPR is launching a civil rights probe. The U.S. Attorney's Office is reviewing the footage for federal charges. He's done. Good, Elias said. The word felt hollow. It didn't fix the problem. It didn't get Volkov back. Rivas finally put her phone down and turned to him. Elias, what you did back there, taking that hit, it was professional. You protected your cover right up until the end. You did everything right. And what did it get us? Elias shot back, his voice sharper than he intended. It got me a concussion and Volkov a plane ticket. All my training, all the tech, none of it mattered. In the end, I was just another kid in a hoodie he could throw on the ground. He looked down at his hands. He didn't see an agent. He didn't see a person. He saw a punk, and he was willing to blow up a federal case just to prove he was the boss. His prejudice doesn't define you, Elias, Rivas said softly. Doesn't it? Elias laughed, a bitter, dry sound. It just defined this entire operation. It defined the outcome. It doesn't matter that I can crack military-grade encryption in my sleep. It doesn't matter that I'm the best analyst the Bureau has. To a guy like Miller, all that matters is what I look like. That's my real uniform. And it's the one I can't take off. Rivas was silent. There was no protocol for this. There was no file she could read, no order she could give. This was the raw, unfixable truth. The Suburban pulled into the secure garage beneath the FBI field office. The heavy gate rolled shut behind them, sealing them in the concrete bunker. Get to medbay, Rivas ordered, her voice back to its professional clip. I want a full workup. CT scan, the works. Do not argue with me, Vance. That's an order. Elias nodded, his anger deflating back into exhaustion. Yes, ma'am. He got out of the truck and stood for a moment, the sterile garage air cool on his face. Kay, he said, not turning around. Yeah? He was right about one thing. What's that? I'm only 18. He finally turned to look at her, and for a second she didn't see her star asset. She saw a tired, bruised kid. I'm really tired. Rivas's expression softened. Go. Get checked out. I'll handle the reports. We'll figure out the Volkov problem tomorrow. Elias nodded and walked towards the elevator. His shoulders slumped. Rivas watched him go, then slammed her hand against the side of the Suburban. Damn it. She pulled her phone back out and dialed the director. This was going to be a very long night. Elias sat on the edge of the examination table in the med bay, the sterile paper crinkling beneath him. A medic, a former army surgeon named Dr. Cole, was shining a pen light into his eyes, his brow furrowed. Well, Agent Vance, Cole said, his voice a gravelly baritone. You have a minor concussion, a sprained left shoulder, and some significant soft tissue bruising on your back. Your wrists look like you got in a fight with a weed whacker. But your pupils are reactive. No signs of intracranial bleeding on the CT. So, I'm good, Elias said, already moving to get off the table. You're not dying, Cole corrected, pushing him back down with a firm hand. You're good in about 48 hours. I want you on observation. No screens, no complex problem solving. And definitely, he added, with the air of a man who knew he was fighting a losing battle. No case files. Doctor, I appreciate it, but nothing, Cole said. You take a hit like that to the head, you follow protocol. Rivas will have my badge if I let you go back to your desk. Now sit. A nurse is bringing you some water and a painkiller. Elias sighed and leaned back against the wall, the frustration bubbling. He was a finely tuned instrument, and he'd just been taken out of the fight by a blunt force idiot. He closed his eyes, replaying the moment of the tackle. The sound, the cold, the smell of pretzels. He'd known Miller was there. He'd seen him a full minute before the tackle. He'd clocked him standing near the fountain, his cop on a power trip stance obvious from 50 yards. Elias had been finishing the data transfer from Volkov's server, a delicate high-speed packet dump. The relay phone, the one Miller broke, was working at 100% capacity, and the storage device on his ankle was filling up. He'd had a choice. He could have ducked into the Cartier boutique. He could have changed his path, aborted the exfil route, and drawn attention to himself. That might have spooked Volkov, who was on the balcony watching. Or he could trust in his uniform. The hoodie, the jeans, the anonymity of being a punk kid. He'd gambled that Miller would ignore him, see him as part of the mall's background noise. He'd miscalculated. He had underestimated the sheer, aggressive need of a man like Miller to impose his will. He hadn't accounted for the fact that his uniform wasn't camouflage. It was a target. The nurse came in, gave him 2 pills and a small paper cup of water, and left. Elias dry swallowed the pills, his mind already spinning, ignoring Cole's orders. The relay was shattered. But the stream. He'd routed the stream from Volkov's phone through the relay. The relay was just a bridge. The data itself was being written to the device on his ankle. When Miller smashed the relay, he didn't destroy the data that had already been transferred. He just cut the connection. The file would be incomplete. Corrupted, maybe, but not gone. He had, by his estimation, about 85% of the file. 85% of Volkov's entire operation. Ledgers, offshore accounts, payoff lists, enough to build a case, enough to get warrants, enough to put him on every no-fly list on the planet. It wasn't a total loss. He swung his legs off the table. Dr. Cole was at a computer in the corner, typing up his report. Elias stood up, his head swimming for a moment. He steadied himself against the wall. "And where do you think you're going?" Cole asked without turning around. "Restroom," Elias lied. "It's the other way," Cole said, pointing over his shoulder. "Right. Concussion," Elias muttered, and walked as steadily as he could out the correct door. The moment he was in the hallway, he turned and walked in the opposite direction, toward the cyber forensics lab. The throbbing in his head was a dull drumbeat, but the thrill of the hunt was a symphony, drowning it out. He badged into the lab. It was his sanctuary, a cold, dark room lit only by the blue and green glow of 24 monitors. He sat at his personal station, a custom-built rig that looked more like an octopus than a computer. He bent down, wincing at the pull in his shoulder, and unstrapped the microdrive from his ankle. It was a solid-state device, no bigger than a stick of gum, and designed to withstand a bomb blast. A little tackle wasn't going to hurt it. He slotted it into his console. "Come on, baby," he whispered, his fingers flying across the keyboard, initiating the decryption sequence. A progress bar appeared. "Decrypting file, NV*01. The bar filled. 10%, 30%, 60%. It stopped at 85%. File corrupted. Unexpected end of file." Elias's heart sank, just as he thought. The file was incomplete. He tried to open it. The system returned a string of garbage text. The index was broken. The file was unreadable. Miller had won. He'd truly, completely won. Elias leaned his forehead against the cool metal edge of his desk. The headache, which had been a dull drum, was now a pounding migraine. He felt a wave of nausea. "I told you," Dr. Cole's voice said from the doorway. "No complex problem solving." Elias didn't look up. "It's gone. The file's corrupt. It's all gone." Cole walked in and stood behind him, looking at the screen. "Looks like gibberish to me." "It is gibberish," Elias snapped. "The file header is missing. The index is shattered. It's just digital noise." Cole was silent for a moment. "You know, when I was a surgeon in Kandahar, we'd get guys in fragmented. A mess. You couldn't just start stitching. You had to find the artery. You had to find the one thing that was still pumping, clamp it, and build out from there. Everything else is just noise until you find the artery." Elias lifted his head. "What?" "Data," Cole said, tapping the screen. "It's just information. You're trying to read it like a book. But the book's torn apart. Stop trying to read the book. Look for the artery. What's the one piece of data in there that has to be intact?" Elias stared at the screen, the doctor's words echoing. Stop trying to read the book. He wasn't a code breaker. He was a forensics analyst. He was a digital archaeologist. He wasn't trying to read the file. He needed to rebuild it. He pushed the pain and the nausea down. "The ledgers," he whispered. "The account numbers. They're encrypted, but the string format is always the same. 16-character alphanumeric strings, prefixed VKF. "Then don't look for the file," Cole said, patting him on the shoulder. "Look for VKF." He turned and left the lab. "You've got 20 minutes, Vance. Then I'm dragging you back to medbay myself." Elias's fingers flew. He wasn't running a decryption program now. He was running a raw data mining script. He was telling the computer to ignore the file structure, ignore the corrupted index, and just scan the raw binary for that 16-character string. Scanning raw. A line of text appeared on the screen. VKF A837 B9F1002E44D and another. VKF A837 B9F1033A the B and another, and another. They started flooding his screen, a waterfall of account numbers, transaction IDs, and offshore routing codes. The ledgers weren't corrupted. They were just scattered. He wasn't just reading the artery. He was rebuilding the entire circulatory system. He hit a new command. Rebuild index from string. Sort by. Timestamp. The computer whirred. The waterfall of text vanished, replaced by a single, clean, beautiful spreadsheet. Gregor Volkov's entire shadow banking system. Every dollar, every bribe, every ghost company. It wasn't 85%, it was 100%. The final packet, the file index, was the only thing that had been cut off. The data itself was all there. Elias leaned back in his chair, the room spinning, but this time in triumph. He hit print and send. One copy went to Rivas, one to the director, one to the U.S. Attorney's office. He looked at the door. "Cole?" he called out. The doctor poked his head back in. "Time's up." "You were right," Elias said, a slow, painful smile spreading across his face. "Found the artery." The next 24 hours were a blur. While Elias was sleeping off his concussion under Dr. Cole's militant supervision, the monolithic weight of the U.S. government began to move. The data Elias had rebuilt was more than a smoking gun. It was a tactical nuke. By 4 a.m., a federal judge, woken by an urgent call, had signed over 24 warrants. By 6 a.m., Gregor Volkov was pulled from a private jet at a regional airfield in rural Virginia. His red blazer rumpled, his face a mask of disbelief. By 9 a.m., simultaneous raids were being conducted in 3 states. The jewelry store in the Galleria was gutted, its reinforced steel vault revealing not diamonds, but hard drives and stacks of bearer bonds. By noon, the story had broken. But it wasn't the real story. The press knew about the arrest of a high-profile businessman. They didn't know how he'd been caught. The arrest was, for now, officially credited to a long-term, multi-agency investigation. The other story, however, was everywhere. The videos from the mall had gone viral by midnight. Every news network, blog, and social media feed was playing the same clips, over and over. Cop tackles black teen in high-end mall. Officer's racist tirade caught on camera. And then, the second, more shocking video. FBI swarms cop, forces him to surrender weapon. The narrative was explosive. It was a story of racial profiling, of police brutality, and of a sudden shocking intervention. The world saw a bully with a badge get publicly and systematically dismantled by a force far greater than himself. Officer Frank Miller was, by 3 p.m., the most hated man in America. His precinct, drowning in furious calls and media requests, had issued a public statement condemning his actions and confirming his indefinite suspension without pay. His police union, in a rare move, issued its own statement clarifying that Miller was off-duty, acting outside his capacity as a sworn officer, and that their legal support would be limited. They were cutting him loose. Elias watched it all from his bunk in the med bay, the small TV muted. He watched the pundits debate. He watched the grainy, shaky cam footage of his own humiliation. He saw himself, pinned to the floor. He heard Miller's voice, muffled and distorted by the phone microphones, calling him a punk. He felt nothing. It was like watching a movie about someone else. The rage of yesterday was gone, replaced by the cold, clean satisfaction of the send button. The door hissed open. Rivas walked in, holding a tablet. She looked, for the first time in a week, like she'd actually slept. "Morning," she said, pulling up a chair. "How's the head?" "Thick," Elias said, "but the nausea's gone. I saw the news. They got Volkov." "They got him," Rivas confirmed, a rare, genuine smile touching her lips. "He's in a federal holding cell, hasn't said a word, but he doesn't need to. Your data is singing like a canary. We're rolling up his entire network. It's the biggest money laundering bust this office has seen in a decade, Elias. A decade." She held up the tablet. "The director sends his personal regards. And this." She tapped the screen. It was an official commendation for valor and exemplary service. Agent Elias Vance. Elias read it, then looked back at the muted TV. "Valor. I got a concussion and ruined a $200 hoodie." "You got the data, Elias," Rivas said, her voice serious. "You took a hit, you protected the drive, and you salvaged an operation that was, by all accounts, dead. You ate the humiliation to protect the mission. If that's not valor, I don't know what is." She tapped the tablet again, switching to a news feed. It was a live shot of Miller, flanked by lawyers, trying to get into his house as reporters shouted questions. He looked broken. "And then there's this," she said. "The U.S. Attorney just filed federal charges. Deprivation of rights under color of law, on top of the state charges for assault. He's going to prison, Elias." Elias watched the pathetic spectacle of Miller stumbling, his face hidden by a baseball cap. The man who had held the power of life and death over him, who had ground his knee into his spine, was now just a man. A failed, racist, broken man. "It still doesn't feel like justice," Elias said quietly. "What does then?" Rivas asked, genuinely curious. "We got the bad guy. The other bad guy is going to prison. The world sees what he did. What's missing?" Elias thought for a moment. He looked at the commendation on the tablet, then at the news report. "He'll go to prison," Elias said, "and in 2 years he'll get out. Maybe he'll find another security job. Maybe he'll just be angry. But he'll still be the man who did that. He'll still believe he was right. He'll just be angry he got caught." He turned to Rivas. "Justice isn't a prison cell, Kay. Justice would be him understanding. Justice would be him seeing me, not the hoodie, not the punk. Me and him being sorry, not for getting caught, but for being wrong." Rivas was silent. She had no answer for that. "The world's not built that way, kid," she said softly. "I know," Elias said, and he looked back at the screen. "But it should be." He swung his legs off the bed. "Cole cleared me. I'm going home. I need a shower. And a new hoodie." Rivas smiled. "Go. You've earned it. The director wants to see you tomorrow. 0900. And Vance?" "Yeah?" "Wear a suit." 2 days later, Elias stood in front of his closet, a towel around his waist. He was in his own apartment, a small, clean studio in Arlington that the Bureau paid for. His head was clear. The bruising on his back had faded to a sickly yellow-green. He looked at the row of suits. Charcoal. Navy. Black. The uniform of the professional. The armor that made him Agent Vance. He picked a dark navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and a simple blood-red tie. An hour later, he was on the top floor, in the director's office. The room was all dark wood, leather, and flags. It smelled of old books and floor polish. Director Thorne, a tall, imposing man with a face like a weathered mountain, was standing by his window, looking out over the Capitol. "Agent Vance," Thorne said, turning. His voice was a deep rumble. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." Elias sat. Rivas was already there, in the other leather chair. "I've read the reports," Thorne began, sitting behind his massive desk. "All of them. Agent Rivas's, the tactical teams, Dr. Cole's, and, most importantly, the after-action from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Gregor Volkov is cooperating fully, in exchange for taking the death penalty off the table for his extracurricular activities. He's giving up everyone. The entire food chain. The politicians he bribed. The other syndicates. This isn't just a win, Vance. This is a rout, and it's your win." "Thank you, sir," Elias said. Thorne leaned forward. "But I also watched the other report, the one on CNN, and Fox, and every other channel. I saw what Officer Miller did to you." His face hardened. "What you did, rebuilding that data, was brilliant. What you endured to get it was unacceptable." He folded his hands. "The Bureau has 2 faces, Vance. The one we show the world," he gestured to the flags, "and the one we show our enemies. You are, without a doubt, one of our sharpest assets. But your uniform, as you aptly called it, makes you a target. This incident with Miller, it's a liability." Elias's blood ran cold. He looked at Rivas. She was staring at the director, her expression unreadable. "Sir?" Elias said. "You're too valuable to be on the street," Thorne said. "Your talent is in your head. It's in those fingers. It's not in getting tackled in a mall. What happened? It can't happen again. The risk is too high. If Miller had found the real drive, if he'd shot you, we'd have lost everything." Director, Rivas cut in. Elias knew the risks. He played it perfectly. He played it dangerously, Thorne countered, his voice rising. He misjudged the assailant. He put himself and the operation at risk. The fact that he salvaged it is a testament to his skill, not his judgment. He looked at Elias. Effective immediately, your field status is revoked. You're being reassigned. You'll be head of the new cyber forensics red cell unit. You'll have your own lab, your own team. You'll be running ops from here. From the dark. Where you belong. It was a promotion. A massive one. Head of his own unit. He was 18. It was a prison. Sir, Elias said, his voice quiet. You're benching me. I'm protecting you, Thorne corrected. I'm protecting my best asset. You'll do more good from a desk than you ever will bleeding on the marble of some mall. Elias stood up. Rivas looked at him, alarmed. Elias, sit. No, Elias said, looking the director in the eye. With respect, sir, you're wrong. You're making the exact same mistake Miller did. You're looking at me, and you're not seeing your asset. You're seeing a liability. You're seeing a black kid in a hoodie. That is not what I'm doing, young man, Thorne said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. Isn't it? Elias challenged. You're taking your best field analyst out of the field because one racist cop couldn't control himself. You're letting him win. You're letting his prejudice dictate bureau policy. He stepped closer to the desk. Why was I there, sir? Because Volkov is paranoid. His firewalls are state-of-the-art. No one could get close to him remotely. You needed someone to get physically close. Someone he wouldn't look at twice. Someone who could blend in. You sent me because I look like a punk kid. You used my uniform as camouflage. And it worked. I got in. I got the data. I was on my way out. This, he said, gesturing to his own face, isn't a liability. It's the reason I'm your best asset. Because no one sees me coming. Miller didn't see an agent. Volkov didn't see an analyst. They saw what they expected to see, and I used that. I will always use that. If you bench me, Elias said, his voice shaking with a passion he rarely showed, you're not protecting me. You're neutering me. You're telling every agent of color in this building that they are too at risk to do their jobs. You're telling the Millers of the world that they have the power to sideline us. Don't do that, sir. Please, don't do that. The room was deathly quiet. Rivas was staring at Elias, a look of stunned, fierce pride on her face. Thorne stared at Elias for a long, long time. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze unblinking. He saw the passion, the intelligence, and the raw, unshakable truth of what Elias was saying. Finally, he nodded, just once. You're right, he said, his voice soft. I was looking at the risk, not the reward. I was looking at the agent, not the man. He stood up. Your field status is maintained, Agent Vance, but you are never to go into a hot zone without tactical overwatch again. Rivas, his team is now a minimum of 12. No exceptions. Is that clear? Yes, sir, Rivas said, a smile breaking free. And Vance, Thorne said, extending his hand. Your suit, it's a good look. But it's not you. Stick to the hoodie. It's better camouflage. Elias looked at the director's outstretched hand. He took it. Thank you, sir. The debriefing was 3 days later, in a sterile conference room. It was just Elias, Rivas, and a lawyer from the U.S. Attorney's Office, a sharp woman named Chen. The case against Volkov is airtight, Chen said, closing her laptop. Your data, Agent Vance, was a work of art. He's pled guilty to, well, everything. He'll be in a supermax for the rest of his natural life. This is a home run. And Miller? Rivas asked. Chen's expression tightened. That's more complicated. He's also pled guilty. The federal charges of deprivation of rights, the state assault. He's taking a deal. With the public pressure, he'll get the maximum. 18 months, maybe 2 years. That's it? Elias said. 2 years? For the assault, the racial profiling, for blowing a 2-year operation? The blowing the operation part isn't a crime, unfortunately, Chen said. Just catastrophic stupidity. The charges are for what he did to you. And in the eyes of the law, 2 years for a cop with a clean record. It's a solid conviction. It's not enough, Elias muttered. I know, Chen said, her gaze softening. But there's something else. Part of his plea deal. He's requested to make a formal apology. To you. In person. Elias stiffened. What? He says he's seen the error of his ways, Chen said, making air quotes. His lawyer probably thinks it'll look good at sentencing. You are under no obligation to accept. We can just submit a written victim impact statement. I'd advise it. It's cleaner. Elias looked at Rivas. She gave a slight shake of her head. Don't. It's a trap. Justice isn't a prison cell, Elias whispered, remembering his own words to Rivas. Justice would be him understanding. He looked at Chen. I'll do it. I'll see him. Rivas looked at him like he was insane. Elias, no. It's a legal tactic. He's just trying to save his own skin. I know, Elias said, but I have to see. I have to know. The room was small, painted a pale, institutional green. It was a visitor's room at the county detention center. Elias sat at a metal table. Rivas was in the corner. As a witness. The door buzzed. Frank Miller walked in. He was not in uniform. He was in an orange jumpsuit. His face was sallow, his eyes were bloodshot. He'd lost weight. He looked small. He sat down opposite Elias, his hands cuffed on the table. A guard stood by the door. For a full minute, neither man spoke. Miller just stared at the table. Finally, he looked up. His eyes met Elias's. Elias had expected to see anger. He'd expected to see resentment or a smug, fake piety. He just saw emptiness, a hollow, defeated man. My lawyer said, I should say I'm sorry, Miller began, his voice a hoarse whisper. Is that why you're here? Elias asked. Because your lawyer told you to? Miller flinched. At first, yeah, to get a better deal. He looked down at his cuffed hands. I've been in this room for 3 weeks, haven't seen the sun. My wife, she left, took the kids. My pension is gone, my whole life, it's gone. Because of... He trailed off. Because of me? Elias finished for him, his voice cold. No, Miller said. He looked up and his eyes were wet. No, because of me, because of what I watched the video. Which one? Elias asked. The one from the lady's phone. The one where you can hear everything. I heard myself. The things I said to you, calling you a punk, I sounded like a monster. He was weeping now, quiet, ugly sobs. I didn't even know that guy. I was so angry, all the time, at the job, at kids with their expensive, I saw you and I just snapped. Elias just watched him, his face impassive. I know saying sorry doesn't fix it, Miller choked out. It doesn't give you back. But I am. I'm sorry. I didn't see you. I just saw, I don't know what I saw. An animal. A problem. And you were just a kid. You were just a kid. He dropped his head to the table, his shoulders shaking. I threw my whole life away. For nothing. For just hating. I'm sorry. Elias sat. He had come here expecting a fight. He'd come here expecting a liar. He hadn't come here expecting a confession. A real, broken, pathetic confession. He remembered what he'd said to Rivas. Justice would be him understanding. This was the start of it. It wasn't perfect. It was messy and selfish and born of his own self-destruction. But it was real. Elias stood up. Miller looked up, his face a mess of tears and snot. "Please, I'll do anything." "I know," Elias said. His voice was quiet. He felt no anger. He felt no pity. He just felt an immense, profound emptiness, the cost of it all, the cost to him, the cost to Miller, the cost to the world. He looked at Miller, the man who had tried to break him. "You've already done enough." He turned and walked to the door, not looking back. The guard buzzed him out. Rivas followed him into the hallway. She didn't say anything. Elias walked out of the detention center and into the bright, hot afternoon sun. He stopped on the steps, breathing in the free air. It smelled like exhaust and hot pavement. "Did you get what you wanted?" Rivas asked softly. Elias thought for a long moment. He thought about Volkov. He thought about his commendation. He thought about Miller, a broken man in an orange jumpsuit. He reached up and touched the faint, fading scar on his cheek, where his face had hit the cold marble floor. "No," he said, and he kept walking. "But I got what I needed." Elias walked alone down the busy city street. He wore his own uniform, a new dark gray hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. He was invisible again, a face in the crowd. People bustled past, their gazes sliding right over him, seeing nothing but a kid, a punk, a non-entity. They didn't see the man who had toppled a kingpin. They didn't see the agent who held the nation's secrets. They didn't see the power he wielded, or the scars he carried. He pulled his hood up against a sudden, cool breeze, a phantom of the mall's cold marble. The data was secure. The case was closed. But the cost, as always, was written in a code no one else could see.